Hey everyone, welcome to the channel. Welcome to Chess and Chill. I'm going to be doing some Puzzle Rush today to demonstrate the key patterns and thought processes necessary to succeed in Puzzle Rush, and of course then take that to your actual games. And I'm going to also play a rapid game, at least one, maybe two, depending on how long I go on Puzzle Rush. So with that, let's get started. Okay, I'm just going to test an arrow real quick and see, make sure. Okay, wonderful. So on these, I think I'm going to tailor these to the more intermediate audience. I've been tailoring a lot of my previous videos to the beginner audience, and I think I pumped out a lot of good material for the beginners. So now I'm going to pump out some material for the intermediates, and what that means is I'm going to be spending less time explaining the basic patterns and emphasize a bit more on thought processes that you should undergo. And yeah, I'm gonna kind of figure it out as I go. But yeah, let's get started. So here, or I guess another thing that I'll be doing is kind of pointing out like higher level patterns and not really explaining them. If you guys want explanations, then just put something in the comments and I'll take a look and I'll try my best to respond. So yeah, let's get started. So I see weak king. This move has popped into my mind on second zero, like immediately. And so I see that this is just mate because our bishop is controlling the escape score for the king. So on this one, I'm doing material count, and I see that the material's even, so after I take the bishop on c5, we just go up a straight bishop. The only thing I have to make sure of is, say, after king f8, making sure that our opponent doesn't have any counterplay. They do have a little bit of counterplay. They're threatening h2, threatening to deliver checkmate. There are a few things I can do to deal with that threat, but I think the simplest is probably just to play g6, starting to put our pawns on dark squares when we've taken our opponent's light squared bishop. But I presume the puzzle will just end after bishop c5, but we still have to make sure that we had some defensive resources to not allow this queen takes h2 idea. So we just played bishop c5, and the puzzle ends. Here we see a back rank pattern, so the first move that comes to my mind is rook f1, and after rook f1, rook e1, rook takes e1, and knight to d1. Rook takes. Our opponent doesn't have any way to stop mate. Here is a similar thing. Opponent has the back rank weakness, and their only defender of the back rank, which was their rook on c1, is no longer defending the back rank. So we just look at rook e1, and then we see that it's mate. So here our opponent's queen is hanging because this bishop is not yet developed, which means that the rook is not protecting the queen like it normally does. So we just play queen takes d1, and that's mate. Okay, so here the obvious queen takes c1 doesn't work, so then we just go to queen takes f2. Queen takes f2, and this is a very common puzzle rush pattern, so I'm not really going to explain it. So after queen takes f2 and king h1, then we bring our queen into f1 and deliver mate. Okay, so the king is really bunched up here because all of his pieces are surrounding him, and unfortunately for him, the dark squares are just a wide open gaping hole and nothing can plug them. So we see the weak dark squares, and then we see the bishop move, bishop h4, and we see that that's mate. So here we have a pawn on h6, which is controlling g7, which means that the opponent is tied down to the back rank. So we have some interesting ideas here. Material count reveals that we are down an exchange and two pawns. We can play knight f6 though. Knight f6 is a move that I like a lot, which unveils a discovered attack on the opponent's queen. The problem is that if queen takes f6, then we play rook takes e8, which is checkmate because back rank weakness. So that means after knight f6, the opponent can only move their king to h8. Notice how my queen is controlling f8. After the opponent moves to h8, we take the queen. If opponent takes back, then we deliver mate on f8. So knight f6 is the idea. First thing I noticed here was this convergence, this coordination of the knight and the queen on h2, and that's just mate. There's more coordination on h2 here, but instead of the knight, we have this open file, so our rook can make its power felt, and we just play queen takes h2. Here is the same pattern as a few puzzles ago. This happens all the time in Puzzle Rush. Okay, once again I see a lot of the dark squares are pretty weak around the king, and that prompts me to see that I can bring in my queen and set up some coordination on f2. So after queen h4, the king has to go to one of these light squares, and then we just bring in our queen and its mate no matter which square the king decides to move to. On this one, I see that I'm plugging all of the opponent's light squares, and I'm plugging the 5th rank on the board. So all I really need to do is plug the square, just the square that the king is on. So then I'm just looking for checks that do that. I'm actually missing. Oh yeah, we have g5, and that's just mate. Yeah, I missed g5 at first because I was just kind of looking at some pieces and queen moves and stuff. But yep, g5 does the job as well. It's supported by our queen, and the opponent's king can't move onto the light squares because they're controlled by our bishop. So g5 is mate. Here we see that f7's undefended, so we just put our queen on f7. Everybody should see that in the intermediate range. Here the thing that is relevant is this bishop pin on g2. That means that this pawn is in fact hanging, and after a rook moves to h3, our bishop notice it sounds. Our bishop reveals control over the g1 square, which means that rook takes h3 is actually mate, because the king doesn't have anywhere to go. You can't take the rook because the pawn is pinned by our bishop, and you can't move the king here because our bishop is controlling the square. And some weird sounds in the background. The move I want to play here is queen takes f2, but I see that after knight takes f2, it doesn't seem like that works. Another potential idea is to play queen h1, and the knight can't take because it's pinned on this file, but it leaves this square open. So then I look for ideas that, because after we move our queen to h1, the king gains e2 as an escape square. So then I just look for an idea that allows us to still control the square, and it happens to be another check. Then I just see the move bishop h3, and after bishop h3, king g1, queen g2 is mate. Note that the knight can't take for the same reason, because it's pinned. It's pinned to the king by our queen, and our queen is controlling the e2 square, so the king is forced to go to g1, and then we just slide our queen in, set up some coordination, and it's mate. Alright, so this is another powerful construction with the queen and the knight sinking their teeth into the position. The icing on the cake here is that we can bring our rook in, because the back rank is vacant. Our opponent doesn't have any rooks on the back rank, so it's very weak. So this is the move, but maybe a way to unpack that, because it's a sacrifice. It might not appear that natural to, I mean, the beginner, maybe the intermediate player, um, but its naturalness comes after solving lots of back rank tactics and realizing that oftentimes you can sacrifice pieces that by bringing them to the back rank, which then deflect other some of the opponent's pieces um, to quit defense of other squares. So in this position, the obvious move is queen takes h2, but the problem is that knight takes h2 just stops that idea very quickly. But we also see that the back rank is hanging, and we can play rook e1. Rook e1 creates mate threats because the opponent can only block with the bishop if they don't take our rook immediately. If they block with a bishop, of course, then we just take that with our queen and it's mate. So you can't block with your bishop. You can't move your king anywhere. The only thing the only thing you can do, you're virtually forced to do this, is take our rook on e1 with your knight. After you do that, the knight is no longer guarding the h2 square that we were mentioning earlier. So then we have the sequence queen h2 check, king f1, and queen f2, and that's mate. So that's the puzzle. Okay, so this is an in-game puzzle. This is a classic pattern, or a classic in-game pattern is when you, and most of you probably know this in the intermediate range, is whenever you have, but so most of you probably are familiar with this position. You've probably seen it many times, but I'm just going to formalize the process in this position because it's very straightforward. As long as you know just one trick in the position, and that is that it's a position in which there's a pawn race of pawns on different edges of the board. So that means we're only talking about the A file and the H file. If it was a pawn on the G file and a pawn on the B file, that's a completely different situation for the reason that I'm about to explain. So it's only when you have a pawn that's racing down one edge of the board and your opponent has another pawn that's racing down the other edge of the board. The key thing to mention here, or the key trick to understand, or idea to understand, is that whoever promotes first controls the diagonal, the long diagonal in the position, which then controls the promotion square of the opponent. So it's simply a matter of who promotes first. That is who wins this position. And in most other positions with pawn races, say if it's like a B pawn versus a G pawn, or a C pawn versus an F pawn, for example, then this doesn't apply, because most of the time, you can if you're losing the pawn race by just one move, or like a half move, then you can often afford to promote second and still be fine, and still claim a draw, still have an easy draw, but not when the pawns are on the edge of the board like this. Whenever the pawns are on the edge of the board like this, it's simply whoever promotes first, and it doesn't matter by how much. It's just who promotes first, and the person that promotes second, their queen will be taken by the firstly minted queen. So in this position, the first thing we want to do is just see if we're going to win the pawn race at all. And a quick calculation reveals that it does, because, and here's how I'm thinking about it. I'm not calculating, for example, like h3, h3, a6, h2, a7. Like, I'm not calculating like that. The way that I see it is I'm counting the squares in front of my pawn. So in front of my pawn are 3 squares, and in front of my opponent's pawn are 3 squares. Because it's my move, that tells me that I'm going to promote first, because after 3 moves, well, yeah, I'll just leave it at that. I know that I'll promote first, and so I know that this is an easy win if I just push my pawn up the board. And our opponent makes the situation even worse for themselves because they're not fighting at all. They're just accepting defeat. Um, I don't know, like no human would not push their pawn in this position if they haven't resigned already. And then we promote. And notice how we control the queening square with our queen. Oh, interesting that the puzzle is making us play another move. The most straightforward move here is just to play queen to h8, which stops the pawn in its tracks and forces the opponent to move to g6. After which we'll just bring our king in and outflank the opponent from g6, and then we will take the pawn with our queen, and then we will mate. Okay, so that was a lot of explanation because that's just like a very fundamental in-game pattern to understand. So, and I haven't had the opportunity to talk about it on the channel before. Despite all of the puzzle videos that I've made, I haven't come across just that, a position as simple as that. And so I thought that I would spend some time on it. Even if maybe the intermediate audience kind of gets it. It's still valuable to reinforce. Because it's not about understanding that particular puzzle, it's about being able to generalize the position of that puzzle in your mind so that when you're calculating more complicated positions, you can stop your evaluation earlier and know that this is either a win, a draw, or a loss. And that's why it's important to reinforce. Because even if you can solve that puzzle, that doesn't mean that your evaluation skills are up to par on those sorts of in-games. That takes additional practice in more complicated positions, where in-game simplifications are just a part of the calculation process. And after all that explanation, we just see that we have a mate in 1. Nothing really to this. Okay. So this is more of a chaotic position. It's normally in these sorts of positions, what I like to do is just identify the unprotected pieces and identify maybe the hanging pieces. So I'm looking at the bishop on c5. I see that it's unprotected, so that's of interest to me. And then I also see that the bishop on g4 is unprotected because it's being hit by our bishop once, and it's being hit by our opponent's knight once. The other thing I see is that there's a little bit of tension in the center. I could always chop off this knight on c6 if I wanted to, and I think that that might be part of the solution. After I chop off this knight, we only have a few options to consider. Number one, our opponent takes back immediately with the pawn, a very natural move to play. After that, however, we have the nice tactical shot, bishop takes f6, which hits the queen. Because no threat of that level can be made to our queen or our king, our opponent is virtually forced to take on f6. After the opponent takes on f6, we can play bishop takes g4, and that wins a piece. Notice how f2 is adequately protected by our king and our rook, so the coordination that our opponent has on the f2 square is innocuous at the moment, and we can keep it that way, of course, with our extra material. Most simply, just moving our bishop back to f3, but that's kind of beyond the scope of the puzzle. The main thing to realize is that our opponent doesn't have an attack in that sequence. So we looked at this and we looked at this. So the next thing I just want to ask myself is checking if there are other critical variations after bishop takes f6 and queen takes f6. Yeah, no, there's nothing there. I think I already answered that question. So then the next question to answer is, what if our opponent doesn't take back immediately? Well, if they don't take back immediately, we're hitting their queen. We're hitting their queen, so they've got to create a pretty damn good threat if they're not going to take back with their queen. If they're not going to take back with the pawn to protect their queen. Um, One thing they could try, which is probably the only thing in this position that would work, is they could move their queen and create a threat on one of my pieces. So I think that would take the form of yeah, no, there's nothing they can do. There's nothing they could do. The only thing they really could do is like queen e7, but that's guarded by our knight, so it's fine. So then after knight takes c6, we just calculate the most natural lines. Bishop takes f3 is really the only thing we need to look at, but then we win the queen. Opponent can get another exchange out of it, but then we just move our queen out of the way, and if you really want the exchange, you can take it, and then you can take this guy back, and we're just up material. So knight takes c6 is the way. Another thing that I noticed in the puzzle is just that after our bishop liquidates itself for this knight, and the queen takes, the queen comes on this diagonal, and this diagonal is kind of tender for us, just because all our pawns are on the light squares. It gives our opponent a lot of access over here. But that's really only a problem if our rook was unprotected, but fortunately for us, we have another rook, and if our opponent ever wins the exchange, then we're bringing our rook over here, so any sorts of threats on the dark squares on the queen side aren't very major. So that means we can play bishop takes f6, and after queen takes f6, then bishop takes g4. Okay, so this is a mating construction. In these sorts of positions where there's only like one piece on the back rank and we kind of have all of our heavy pieces active, we just look for sacrifices on the back rank, because the simplest thing we can do is just deliver back rank checkmate. So then we just see queen takes f8, king takes f8, rook d8, and that's just game. That's just game, because our rook on the e file controls all these squares, which means that the king has nowhere to go. We have this nice little corner on the market, if you will, and that's the game. Here I really like my dark squared bishop. I note that if my bishop was on f6, then this would be mate, because I would play rook d8. Unfortunately it's not, but my king is active and I still have some checks that I could try. So the first thing I calculate is rook d8, because this seems like it could lead to a forced mate anyway. So after rook d8, king e7, then we bring in our bishop. And it's as simple as that. That's mate because our king is active and it's controlling the e6 square. Other than that, the king has nowhere else to go, so yay. Symmetrically, well, actually there's no need for this argument because the king is forced to come to e7. The king is incapable of navigating to any of these squares, and that's all we have to do to calculate. This is pretty, because we're moving our bishop to protect our knight and deliver checkmate through the king, and it's also crucial that our king on f5 controls e6, or else that would have been an escape square for the king, and this construction would have been faulty. Alright, this is screaming Bowden's mate. Bowden's mate is whenever you have two bishops that can slice up the king and form this little box, which just completely ensnares the king. If the king steps out of the box, then we just deliver a back rank checkmate. So after bishop e6, the only thing we need to look at is if the knight interposes, because the king, like I said, if the king moves to b8, then we just play rook d8. So if knight d7, then we just take. Opponent has to do the same thing, and we evaluate the material in that position. Oh, actually no. If the knight blocks, then we take with the rook. I think that's a far better approach, because then we set up deadly discovered threats, and also just rook d8 ends the game. Our opponent has to play g6 or something. But then we're not too worried about that. That's so funny. I was thinking about the Bowden's mate pattern. And only after calculation did I realize that the Morphe's mate pattern also applies. So rook d8 just ends the game on the spot. That's much better. Rook d8 mate 1, much better. Alright, so here we just see we have this battery, so we should be looking for how we can use the battery to crash through on the opponent. Queen takes g7 as mate. Alright, so we have an opportunity for a discovered attack because we have our bishop on c4, hits the king on g8, this a2 to g8 diagonal is ours. We can just move our knight out of the way, and then our rook will also come into play. This is going to be plenty to checkmate. The sequence is going to go like knight h6, knight h6, king h8, and rook f8. That's all there is to it. Game over. Our bishop is, nobody can take our bishop, and notice how knight h6 is double check, because our bishop checks the king and our knight checks the king. Therefore, king h8 is forced. You don't even think about interpositions, and rook d8. Or sorry, rook f8. Alright, so here I have 2 rooks, and I have an almost open file, and I have a queen that's controlling g8. That means that I should be able to mate. I should be able to mate by sacrificing my rook on g7, on h7 to open up lines. So after rook takes h7 check, king takes h7, we just bring our other rook to h1, and queen h4 is forced, and then we just take, and that's mate. So let's see that sequence in play. And there you go. So in this puzzle, I like my rook that's on b7 because it prevents the king from moving backwards. I like my knight because it starts to lock down more squares around the king. Finally, I like this pawn because it locks down even more squares around the king. What's missing from this equation? Well, what's missing from this equation, oops, let me put this up again, are the dark squares. The dark squares are missing from the equation, so then we just see bishop e4 mates. Okay, so the king is in a really weak position right now, but my piece activity is not really great. My queen is awkward, my rooks aren't coordinating, one of my rooks looks really awkward. What do I do here? Well, I've got to just look at my checks. I just got to look at queen b3. I don't really see what else I can do. So after queen b3, I love it because it's very forcing. It forces the opponent to go to h7, and then we can calculate something from there. Opponent can't block with their queen because we just take it. So king h7 is forced. If we're looking at our checks, we see that we don't have anything. So then we go and think about, other sorts of threats. Well, I mean, I like the threat of rook takes g4 because we're threatening to win the queen on the next move, which is great. If we look at the material count, the material's completely even. Pawns and everything just completely even. Sorry, we're up a pawn, so even better. Yeah, so king h7, king h7, king h7. I like rook takes g4. Rook takes g4 is the idea behind it is just to threaten rook h4. So now I'm just looking for number one, my other ideas, just to make sure I'm not missing anything, because, rook g4 gives my opponent some time to do something. Yeah, I think rook takes g4 is the idea. So after queen b3, king h7, we play rook takes g4, threatening rook h4. So we just look for any sorts of counterpunches that our opponent has, because there's no way that our opponent can prevent this idea. You can't move this pawn. Moving the rook is useless. Potentially moving the queen could be helpful, actually. So we'll look at that. But first I want to look at the counterpunches, because those generally are more damning, and if we miss one of those, then we could just lose the entire game. So first we're looking at our opponent's checks. Opponent has no checks. Then we look for opponent threatening ideas. Well, there's knight takes a5, but knight takes a5 allows rook h4, which is unthinkable because it forces queen h6, and then we win a whole queen. Oh, actually, no. We can't take with the pawn. If we take with the pawn, our opponent takes our queen. So there is a little extra layer of complexity there. But we could also just take with our rook instead of taking with our pawn, and then we preserve our queen. So queen b3, king h7, rook takes g4. If knight takes a4, we might even be able to just take back immediately and then claim that we're still threatening h4, rook h4. So the only thing to look at is how can the queen escape and maybe create some threats. I mean, the queen could go to e1, where it maybe creates some remote threats on e1, king h2. I don't think there are really any threats there though. Once the king is on the h file and this rook is blocked. So yeah, let's just look at that line: queen b3, king h7, and then queen d8. Oh, sorry. Queen b3, king h7, rook takes g4, queen d8, and then we play rook h4, king g6. I guess we have rook takes h8, queen takes h8, and then we have queen e6, which nearly mates. King h7. I guess we could take over here, and then we're just a minor piece up. Our opponent has a threatening move, would have this threatening move, queen h6, or queen h3. We would need to stop that. No, actually, sorry, we're already stopping that. Okay, so we're wonderful, So the idea is queen b3 and rook g4. And so if the queen cannot come to h5, because then we can play g6, and we control like two squares at once. We start controlling h7, and with our bishop, our bishop is now controlling h6, and so this is unthinkable. Queen h6 is going to be forced, and then we don't even take with our rook. We play rook h4, which forces queen h6, and then we take with our bishop, and that wins more material. Yeah, we play the clever rook h4. Oh, except we're pinned. Oh no, we're pinned. So we have to play queen g6, or rook g6. That's fine. So I'd love this file to be open. I don't like this queen, but I have some checks. So I check and the king comes here. That's almost mate. Could I just take right here? Probably not. You go here, I go here, then you bring your knight, and then I move over, and then you come down here, and then I block with the bishop, but you take. That's terrible. That is terrible. Or maybe I could get away. Maybe, just maybe I could get away. So I fork you here, and then take with the queen. Oh, I have this extra layer of defense, which is my queen. So you would probably take right here. Okay, So we need to do more evaluation here, or just more lines. So I think what we actually want to do is we want to, yeah, I was hallucinating earlier with this check. What time is it? It's getting close to my bedtime. So, so I'll probably just go to 30 and then stop so I can play some rapid games. One of these days I'd love to have enough time to go to like 55, but I know that video will take long time with explanations. So actually what we can do is we can play Queen E3. Queen E3, king moves over to somewhere, and then we take this knight, we win a free piece. Opponent can't take anything of ours, we just have to look for counter punches. Only conceivable idea I see is bringing the queen to d4, threatening to come to d7, but then we would just move our king over. I don't really see anything, so yeah. Trading queens is terrible here, because you want to kind of keep some chaos and some tension in the position when you're behind. When you simplify too much, it's just the technique to win is very easy. Okay, so this is a case of the weak diagonals. Boom, look at that diagonal, specifically around the king. So our formula for checkmate is very close. We just need to control these two squares. We're already controlling these ones, so we just need to control these two. So this move kind of screams out at you. And then as soon as you realize that it's a double check, you see that it's mate, because the king can't move anywhere. So yeah, just very simple. And okay, so that's 30. I am going to hop in a rapid game, and we're going to see how that goes. I'm going to hop over to Lee Chess, because that's where I prefer playing games, because I have the little thing that goes, check, check, whenever you make a check, or your opponent does. So I'm kind of making a big transformation in my openings. I've been playing e4 since
Ready.
like probably 1400, and I think I'm finally deciding to go back to d4 to see what that world has to offer. We get black in this game, so we don't really get to go into pure d4, but I think Caro-Kann is close enough. Everybody likes to play the Shirov. And follow it up with d4. Oh, okay, this is a novelty. Not good at all. There's no reason we can't just continue with development, start to control our opponent's breaks. We'll just develop with the queen side, and claim this move doesn't fight for the center at all. The idea of h3 is to play g4, and if I develop my bishop to f5, then sure, that could make some sense. Even in that position, it's questionable, because after bishop g6, we always have the idea of h5, which fights away at this structure immediately. But we don't even give our opponent the play that they want, and instead just develop our queen side as normal with knight c6. So our opponent has given us the opportunity to take space in the center. It's very hard to refuse that offer. Alright, So our opponent is putting pressure on our pawn. We have a few options. Number one, we could open up our game and play e5 and protect this pawn. And that is what we're going to do, because how else can our opponent put pressure on e5? Not really at all. Alright, so now I think we just want to continue with normal development. Yeah, we might, okay, if we continue with normal development is great, but if we want to play super accurate, we should make sure to really squeeze the juice in this position. So I mean, I love knight f6 because we're supporting e4. Bishop e3 looks nice here, but I'm not sure what it accomplishes. Bishop d6 supports e4, but we can't play e4 yet anyway, because we need to control this square, and bishop f4 is f5 is a blunder. So queen h5 is an idea which keeps this pawn pinned, but allows c3. If our opponent plays c3, I'd really like to play d3, but I can't do it in that position because our queen's no longer controlling the d file. So I think I like our queen on the d file. So with that logic, I think knight f6 is the move, the best move. It continues with natural development while creating threats in the center. You couldn't really ask for better of a move. Our opponent has to make a decision now. Do they concede with d3, which blocks this light squared bishop in? It's not really going to have an influence in the game. Okay, so this is screaming fork. So we need to calculate if this works already. If the knight takes, and then we play queen e7. Actually, sorry, no. If the knight takes, then we take with the knight, and then the bishop takes, and I think we would play queen e7, and after queen e2, f5 would be the critical try, but then bishop takes c6. Or sorry, not bishop takes c6. Yeah, bishop takes c6. So I'd like a little bit more control over this square. I think I like the move bishop d6 here. Also an option is queen d5. Or bishop e6 followed by bishop d5, but I think we want fast development here. There's also knight b4. But knight b4, just bishop c4. Bishop c4, queen c7. No, I am not in love with that. I don't really want that to happen. So bishop e6 makes a lot of sense, but I like d6 to support e4, but that might be a moot point actually, because bishop d6 doesn't really support the e4 square, which is something we would need. So perhaps queen d5. Queen d5 seems like a good try. Bishop e6 seems good. Very natural. And maybe bishop d6. But actually, I actually like bishop e6, I think. Does allow knight g5. But queen d5 comes with concrete threats. And then if you play c4, what? There's also even knight d5, which is probably premature here. But still an interesting try. I think I like bishop e. Okay. I think I just want to get a rook on e1 and push forward. So bishop d6 or bishop c5. I like bishop d6 so that once we get a rook on e8 and play e4, or threaten it, then it also comes with the additional threat of taking on g3 and doubling the pawns and exposing the king on this diagonal. And then we save this bishop for potential attacks and sacrifices over here. Castle. We could even like centralize. Oh, this move is not what the position requires, buddy. All right. Not fighting for the center. You can't just do that. You can't. I don't even know how to explain this, but like this position is critical. You don't have time for a move like that. So rook e8 is nice. So is knight d5. Rook e8 I really like though. It's very natural. Okay, so now we have to figure out how we want to proceed. This knight we would like to contribute into the game. We'd really like to just get a little bit more control over e5 or e4. Let's see what happens if we play e4 now. Knight takes. Knight takes. So we could consider b6 followed by bishop b7. But I don't know if I want my bishop there. And then where is this knight going? Maybe it makes more sense to move this knight first. Our opponent is getting good control over e4. Actually, I think I like this idea. Of throwing the bishop into d5. Yeah, this bishop d3 move is just terrible. Just terrible. This bishop right now is arguably worse than this bishop. Okay, so now it's changed. Now this bishop is a lot better. That didn't really stop our plan, though, of playing bishop d5. We could also tempo the bishop, invite the trade, and we would have to deal with this move. So I kind of like bishop d5, but that allows e6. So what if I play e4 right now? E4 right now... Bishop takes. Takes. Then you would take right here. Maybe I would move up. I actually really like that. if knight takes here, then knight takes and bishop up. Bishop takes, you come here. I don't have a lot of time, so I've got to make the move. But I really like opening up the position like this, with my bishops just pointing at the opponent's king side, and my opponent's queen side just completely undeveloped. I think that's going to allow us to just to exploit our development advantage immediately by liquidating our pawn center. I wouldn't. I would not be surprised at all if the computer suggests a better approach in the analysis. Um, Perhaps maybe even a few moves ago. This will be a good one to analyze, but um, yeah. Now I really like bishop d5. We were trying to play that anyway. Inviting knight takes f6. Queen takes f6. Oh, actually, no, I think this is better. And then tempoing the rook.
Time is running out. Check.
So we have to figure out what happens when the opponent offers a queen trade. Okay, so they don't. I think that is a blunder, actually, hopefully. Because of this, followed by rook e8. The opponent takes here immediately. I probably go in, move over, take. If bishop takes, no, bishop's not going to take. You move your bishop away somewhere. Then I play, I could try the forcing move. Queen h1, then the king comes here, and then I bring in this guy. Oh, that actually looks great. If the bishop, and then if the bishop goes to d4, you have to come to e4, or sorry, if you go to d3, you have to come to e4, and then rook takes. Then the king's got to come here, and then I win the queen, and that's completely winning. And that line is probable to occur, I think. That one, does that one do anything? We just take, come here, and then come here, and then there, and then here, and then there, here, and then here. I just think that makes the position worse. Alright.
Check.
So we come in. And do we... I presume we just come in. Yeah, and then we come in. You go here.
Check.
And then we play rook e8. You have to block.
Check.
And then we take the knight. And if you block with a bishop, you lose. If you block with a queen, that's probably better. That just allows this. Yeah, bishop g2. Being mate.
Check. Victory.
So, okay, I'm going to analyze this for y'all because I think this is a really good game. I'm going to decline the rematch request. Go straight into the analysis. Because, yeah, I think my decision to open up, to liquidate my pawn center like that, sacrificing some central pawns, is precisely what won me this game. And I think that's hard for a lot of players to do. It was hard for me to do, but I just really liked it. Okay, yeah, so first thing off the bat, so opponent kind of played the opening terribly. They played the opening really bad. So this is standard, this is fine, this is fine. Not the greatest. No, sorry, this is fine, this is completely fine. This is what's not the greatest. This h3 move is terrible. I think our opponent was hoping that we would play brainless Karo Khan, bishop f5, and knight f6, e6, and go for that sort of standard, like Carlsbad looking structure. But first of all, I mean, I looked at this move and I'm like, this fights none for the center. This fights none for the center. So I could even have considered d4 here, and probably the engine's going to say that's the best move. But knight f6 is fine. Knight f6 is great because we don't play into our opponent's hands with bishop f5. Even if bishop f5, even if it's objectively okay to play into our opponent's hands, why would we give our opponent opportunities to make something happen? I would rather play principled chess and give my opponent 0 chances than play objectively sound chess and give my opponent counterpunches. I would rather them have no weapons than me having a stronger weapon than them. And yeah, our opponent continues to allow us to fight in the center. So definitely d4 should have been played here. Like, no brainer, d4 should have been played here. And then we would have gotten a relatively normal Karo Khan position. I still would have been a little bit better because this h3 move is pretty weird. But, like, you know, the position kind of closes down. The pawns in the center are not very tense, and this knight's kind of awkward. But nothing terribly bad is going on. And the game is going to be a little bit slower, most likely. Maybe our opponent will lash out with a premature g4 that we could hit with h5. But, like, the game is kind of like nobody's winning, nobody's losing. I think black is happy, but white is not pouting. Yeah, so I'm sorry, but even here, like, d4 had to be played here. You have to fight for the center. Best move is probably after h3 to play d4 here, just to exploit the fact that you didn't play d4 earlier. But I go for the knight f6, knight c6, which I think is fine as well, but I'm sure the computer will prefer knight d4, or d4, instead of knight c6. But the opponent exacerbates the issue by failing to recognize the urgency of d4. We finally decide to exploit that fact by playing d4 ourselves, which pushes this knight away and gains space for ourselves. The opponent sends the knight to a very awkward square. e2 is really awkward because it blocks in the bishop and it retreats the knight. Much better for the opponent would have been knight e4, which both keeps the diagonal open for the bishop and centralizes this knight on e4, where it can't really be bullied. I could play bishop f5, but knight g3 is a very standard idea, and then I would also lose a tempo. This would be more or less normal Karo Khan. This would be fine for white. Or this would be playable for white. Knight e2 is really, I think, when the position starts to get out of hand. I could have even considered the move d3 here, which just paralyzes the opponent's pawn structure. If they move the knight, then we take, which is that's probably the best thing to do, is to move the knight, we take the pawn at c2, queen takes, and we create a nice IQP structure. which seems very nice for black, but maybe not even the best approach. I think my approach was excellent, probably the best, but we'll see. We'll see what the computer says. And again, 92 is such a weird move. Opponent decides to go to G3, which wastes more time in the opening. So, yeah, just I don't think knight G6, knight G3 was a bad move, but it was kind of necessary. But it highlights how the previous move was just terrible. 92 was just terrible. And I know exactly what the opponent was thinking. The opponent was thinking that they wanted to put as much pressure as possible on d4. The thing that they failed to recognize, however, is that they can't put any more pressure on the pawn besides this construction right here, and I am handling this pressure fine, just fine. 2 attackers, 2 defenders, nothing going on, and you can't really put more attackers on it besides c3. But if you play c3, then I'm sinking my teeth into your position. I'm playing d3, and this is not going to be fun for you. Your queen side is never going to see the light of day. So e5, probably the best move. Knight g3, knight f6, very, very normal. Now I'm threatening to play e4. So notice how I tried to make all of my moves come with threats that also threats, but the moves also improve my position in general. Bishop d3 was, I think bishop d3 is a terrible move, and bishop d3 came directly as a result of me continuing to put pressure on my opponent. Playing knight f6, I'm threatening e4, and the opponent already starts to collapse. They play bishop d3, which exacerbates the situation. Number one, the bishop and the knight on the third rank are in a forking construction, which means that my idea to play e4, which was already an idea, is now even stronger, because if I get it in, then I'm forking the opponent's pieces. Okay, that's number one. Number two is that you're blocking your d-pawn from ever moving. If you're doing that, then you're gaining less control of the center, and you're never going to efficiently develop the queen side. This bishop is like a thorn in your side that you stabbed into yourself. But it's a direct result of the pressure that I applied in the position, because the opponent was faced with a problem. I made my opponent try to solve a problem, and they solved it in a very suboptimal manner. And that problem was the control of e4. And I did this with very natural knight f6, which I was going to play in basically every position, especially when the opponent's knight is committed to f3. Here I wasn't entirely sure how to proceed. I love the engine's feedback on this move. But my idea was that I didn't have any immediate threats that I could create besides bishop e3, bishop e6 to bishop d5. But I didn't really like that in the game, and instead preferred the simple approach of developing the bishop, which will come with threats whenever we do get e4 in. But more importantly, we clear up the king side to allow us to castle and bring the rook into the game, which would then support our advance to e4. And once that happens, of course, this bishop is well placed. Opponent castles, and h3. The opponent has lost touch with reality. From a3, they clearly don't understand the needs of this position. Oh, I'm also seeing that my opponent was actually, I guess not. That's not too much lower rated, but surprisingly lower rated. They were like 1800, and yeah, I would have expected. I guess I just expected that I was going to play stronger competition, but I didn't. I like to play in Zen mode where I don't really look at the ratings, so that I'm not fixating on that during the game, because I think that just distracts me. So this is like the first time that I saw the rating. And then I'm like, oh, okay, well, it makes sense why they would play a move like a3. But a3 is just terrible because there's a clear struggle going on in the center. I'm quickly developing my pieces, and I've already won the center with my pawns. The opponent has to fight back rapidly, or else their position is going to collapse. I'm going to get in the e4 advance, and then you're dead meat. My pieces will shine bright, and yours will be fighting for survival. Um, yeah, much better here would have been like rook e1, which fights for control of e4 immediately, and that makes it a lot harder for me to advance my pawn to e4. But the a3 move allows me to play rook e8, which gains control of e4. Now I'm actually threatening to play e4. So our opponent has to respond with rook e1, and notice how they would have loved to spend the move that they wasted on a3 on something like really anything, like bishop c4 to play e6, or maybe in desperate situations queen e2. Just anything but a3, because that move does nothing, and white needs to do something here. So bishop e6 seems very natural. My bishop doesn't have a lot of squares, and I didn't really want to bring it to d7 because I saw that it had a pretty bright future on d5. And clogging up the e file, I'm not even really clogging it up. And blocking my rook scope is not really relevant here because we're playing for this e4 push. So everything is for the e4 push. Our opponent eventually had to solve the problem of moving their bishop on d3 so that they could play d3 themselves. And I like this move conceptually because it fights for the center. It's the idea is very clear. You just want to take this knight and weaken my pawn center, after which e6 helps you a lot, and you can maybe get this dark square bishop developed somewhere, maybe d2, for example. And then your game is like you're fighting back. You're fighting back. You're not just letting yourself be pressurized incessantly. So, and I could have played bishop d5, and I'm really curious what the computer has to say about this position because e4 won me the game really quick. But bishop d5 is kind of the more like solid approach, and e4 is the more dynamic approach. And my intuition told me that the needs of this position were very dynamic. I mean, clearly, right? We're fighting for the center. We're accumulating a development advantage. We're accumulating we're developing superior central control, and we're trying to break through and attack the opponent's king because we have those sorts of advantages that allow us to do that. And I see that my bishops are shining bright on the king side, ready to coordinate with the other pieces. And after I play e4, I also open up the e5 square for my knight, and we would have a fantastic attack. So then the critical lines are the pawn sack lines. What happens there? Well, I calculated bishop takes c6, b takes c6, and then the opponent takes the knight takes c4, knight takes c4, the rook comes in, and then boom, my bishops are completely activated at the king. And this was the main reason that I played this move, is I love that in all the lines where the opponent responds in the center, their queen side is completely undeveloped. And my pieces are all completely centralized and ready to attack the king. I figured that significant of an advantage in development was worth liquidating the pawn center and sacrificing some material for. And it worked really, really fast in the game. Another try, I think, would have been like knight takes d4. So after bishop takes c6, b takes c6, knight takes d4. Seems a bit more critical. Not sure. This line just doesn't seem as easy. Play bishop d5 and what, you know. Still threatening to play e3. This still looked good enough to play this move e4. But I think that a much better try would have been bishop takes c6, b takes c6, knight takes d4. But we'll see what the computer has to say. Yeah, knight takes e4, not really great because we just take, and then we centralize our bishop with tempo. Our bishop is on a very happy square.
Check.
Check, check. And I think this is where the opponent just collapses. I think a much better alternative would have been to play queen e1, offering a queen trade, which makes it a bit more difficult for us. Though even after queen e1, knight e1, rook e8, our position still looks very good. But I still think this would have been a better approach. Is just trading the queens. You recognize that our bishop pair is shining bright in the center and on the king's side. We're clearly trying to attack. So just trade the queens off, make the attack harder. But we still preserve a nice development advantage after the queen trade, at the very least. The computer, in these positions, the computer tends to suggest keeping the queens, even if it means temporarily relocating to an awkward place. So knight takes d4. I think knight takes d4 is the nail in the coffin. Our bishops are just too strong, and we have control of the e-file. A tactic basically has to be there, and I find queen e5. Yeah, queen e5. If knight f6, we take, queen takes, and then we bring our queen in. King goes to f1, and maybe rook e8 here is really strong, but queen h1, king e2, rook e8. Yeah, actually, I probably would have played rook e8. But that's a shallow analysis. And then, yeah, what the hell are you doing on e2? Like, why are you going back to e2? Like, if you're going to retreat your knight, like, put it on its more defensive post, you know? This is just passive and not defensive. Knight f6 is at least defensive and scoping in on the center, but also defending the critical h2 square. This is just, yeah, really shows the opponent's level of skill. And then the win is very concrete.
Check.
That we found in the game.
Check.
Take the additional pawn. Again, we just made use of both of our bishops. We made use of our dark squared bishop by supporting our queen's entry into the king side via queen h2. And we're making immediate use of our other bishop, our light squared bishop, by penetrating deeper on g2, putting the opponent's king into a box, and then the win is concrete. Queen h1, which forces knight g1, and then we play rook e8, bringing our very last piece in the game, who didn't have a role. He now has a role. And I think queen e2 is the best move. And after I take right here, no, sorry, queen e2 is, no, there's no best move here. It's just all mate, actually. Yeah. Yeah. Yep, it's all mate. Wonderful. That was a great game. I love that game. Let's run it through the computer. All right. Start from the beginning. e4, blah 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 blah. Karo Khan, weirdness. This is the weird. This move is weird. Let's see if the computer suggests d4. d4 and knight c6 and bishop f5 are all evaluated the same by the computer. No distinction. So knight c6, very natural. Knight f3 and black is already better. We play the best line. And of course the computer suggests knight e4 is a bit better than knight e2 for the reasons that I stated in the previous analysis, with the centralization of the knight and the mitigation of awkwardness with piece play. We play e5. E5 is actually superseded by knight f6, which controls the center as well. Seems like the reasoning is that no need to push pawns when we can develop pieces and push our pawns later. Nothing's ever going to stop us from playing e5. We don't need to play it immediately. In the game, I really liked e5 because I wanted to push e4, but I think the lesson for me, actually, I don't know. The lesson for me would be that I didn't need to do this yet. I don't really think it matters, actually. I feel like knight f6 and e5 are coming no matter what in this position. So, yeah. And then, yeah, so black is better. Black is just better. Oh, can you guys not see the engine lines? You can see two of them. Let's fix that. Alright, that's good. Okay. And yeah, bishop d6 is not as bad as I expected, honestly, but still a bad move by computer standards. And let's see. Okay, yeah, computer agrees with my move bishop d6. Castle, castle. And yeah, a3 is like, what are you doing, man? We're only at a depth of 13 right now, but I'm sure the eval will go down once we reach a higher depth, because that move is just so bad. It's taking a while. Taking quite a while. That's because my computer is just getting kind of maxed out with streaming and stuff. We're not really gonna wait. A3 is just terrible on principle. Doesn't fight for the center. What are you doing over here? You're already in a critical position. You can't afford to waste another move on a move that doesn't prepare anything useful at the moment. This position is very short term. And A3 it prepares, I don't even know what it prepares, just like it might not prepare anything besides, like, if it could prepare a potential b4 expansion, but then you create a weak pawn on c2 and I have the open c file or semi-open c file. And it's just not worth spending an entire move on preventing my knight to come to b4. It's already happy on c6. And if I wanted to play knight b4, I could have played it here. That's not great reasoning, but you get the point. And let's see here. What is the idea? A5, bishop c7. Bishop c7 is a move that I considered later, only after bishop e6. It makes most sense to me to a5 and a6 are also ideas. What does it think of my move? Bishop d3, it does not like as much. Does not like, or bishop e3, sorry, does not like as much. You go from 0.7 to minus 0.7 to minus 0.3. Precisely because of knight g5. Which then best is just to move this bishop back. Wait, I thought this would have been great. What's wrong with this? c4. When we're forced to take and take. And all of a sudden our opponent has a lot more central control and has solved a lot of their opening problems with development. Wow, that's a quick turn of tides. And for that reason, bishop c7 was a better approach. Gives the queen control of the d file, essentially. And maybe later, if this knight on g3 ever moves away, preparing ideas of queen d6, which is a checkmate battery. And dealing with this knight. We'd have to deal with the knight. Which is not very hard. Interesting. I want to see this bishop c7 idea. b4, which does nothing. Knight d5, natural play. Bishop c4.